Before we get into a little bit about ourselves, we'd like to first note that what we talk about here today is not affiliated with all of our affiliated organizations, and all of the content today is just from me and Tarah.
All right.
So a little introduction about me. I graduated from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore in 2020, right into the pandemic, with a bachelor's in East Asian Studies, Economics, and International Studies, and a minor in History. When I graduated, I really thought I was going to go into foreign policy, and I spent a year abroad in China, so China was my focus. In the pandemic, I started my master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I had some requirements to take care of my first year, and I took a class with someone you might know, Bruce Steyer. His talents are not as well for the virtual space. So I went back and TA'd for him the following year and had the joy of being with him in person. He brought toys to teach everyone about the dangers of Bluetooth-enabled devices. Would love to tell that story later. And that summer I needed an internship, and I happened to apply for the Belfer Center research assistantship, which is where I met Rob Kanacki, who is heading the project, and the lovely Tarah. I am passionate about Dunkin' Donuts, but I am not here to say it's good coffee. No one says that. Dunkin' Donuts is a lifestyle, and I will die on this hill. In my free time, I love knitting, and I love to travel.
Very cool. I would like, before I introduce myself, to tell you all that this is not just Victoria's first Black Hat talk. It's not just her first cybersecurity talk. It's her first talk ever. So you can't go anywhere but down from here, honestly. This is amazing. So congratulations to Victoria for one hell of a debut already. Hello, my name is Tarah Wheeler. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. I am CEO of Red Queen Dynamics, a compliance orchestration and security education firm. I'm a Fulbright scholar for the US and UK in cybersecurity. And that is, of course, at Harvard Belfer Center, where I met Victoria and began working on the Aviation Lessons Learned project with Rob Kanacki and Adam Shostak. So I had a great chance to get to know Victoria, work on this project, and I guess the reason I'm here and the reason I love all of this, especially risk management, is I'm both a poker player and a pilot. So this really hits home for me, this question, this concept of how we manage risk in organizations, and I love doing this. I'm a giant risk nerd, I guess, for some reason or another. So what does really bring us kind of all together here today? Well, the question really is, why are cyber incidents like plane crashes? What I'd love to do is tell you a little bit about the history of this project and turn it over to Victoria to explain more about what we're doing today. So for the last 30 or 40 years, we've been using the analogy of the NTSB as a great way to describe how an investigation should yield a shared history of an incident, a shared narrative of it, right? One of the challenges that we face in cybersecurity is that we don't share history. We don't produce sort of an industry-wide description of what happened during an incident and use that for future lessons learned and for future prevention. So when Rob and Adam came together to create this project, they interviewed, and then we interviewed over 100 different experts in the area of how to take aviation lessons and the process of doing an investigation at the NTSB, and began asking what that would look like in cybersecurity. In November of last year, we released the Learning from Cyber Incidents report, which is over 100 pages. We definitely encourage you to not read it this second, but certainly soon, and learn a little bit more about what people think about how we can build a shared narrative in cybersecurity that takes those lessons from an industry that does it really, really well. When there's a plane crash, we all pretty much understand why pretty quickly. And then the next year, some new regulations come out that all pilots have to deal with. Well, over the course of doing this project, we realized it wasn't just that we were constantly facing perpetual threats and attacks that people hadn't really figured out how to repeat and improve processes for prevention for. We started to realize that, well, in cybersecurity, this challenge of trying to keep information secret, of trying to keep it close, meant that we were perpetually fighting this uphill battle to get information disseminated to the industry and to the community about how something happened and what we could do in future. That wasn't just limited to some contractor failed to update the struts box and that's how Equifax happened, right? Or somebody didn't push the SMB updates and that's how WannaCry happened. And so we wanted to ask ourselves, why is cyber investigation and the production of those reports not like plane crashes? Well, we don't maintain that shared history, but also I think it's really important to look at how the aviation industry investigates and understands incidents and what they do to prevent things in future. Now, one of the reasons I like Victoria is she has read every single document on the 737 MAX crashes and every single investigative report that was produced by the NTSB and the FAA. So, report nerd, would you like to tell us a little bit more about why and how the NTSB creates these kinds of reports and what we could learn from them?
Sure. I will take mercy on you all and not drag you through the black hole I went into researching this, but I did really enjoy myself. So happy to chat more if anyone is also interested in these kinds of things. So a really great way to look at the difference that we have right now for the streamlined approach that the NTSB takes to aviation incidents and the kind of haphazard approach we still haven't developed for cybersecurity is to look at the Boeing 737 MAX and how the NTSB handled that. Mm-hmm. So in 2018, the Lion Air flight first crashed into the Java Sea after departing from Jakarta. Mm-hmm. The recordings of the data tell us that over the course of the short flight, the angle of attack sensors on the left and the right side of the plane were reporting different measurements. And that forced the nose of the plane, it triggered the MCAS system, which forced the nose of the plane to go down and forced the plane into a dive. The pilots repeatedly counteracted the MCAS system to take control of the plane and bring the nose back up, but after doing it successfully multiple times, failed and the plane crashed. The same thing happened in the Ethiopia flight, where after takeoff, the nose of the plane dipped too far down. After the miscalculation of the angle of attack from the left and right sensors, the pilots tried to counteract it multiple times and finally failed and the plane crashed. The FAA grounded the flight and the Indonesian and Ethiopian transportation agencies conducted their own reports because it was done these incidents happen internationally and the NTSB was in a supporting role. But the NTSB's final investigative report is really important here because it went into not only the details of the incidents themselves, but Boeing's failure to account for how the MCAS system would interact with other alerts going on in the cockpit and how those alerts would distract pilots and keep them from responding as Boeing had expected them to, and faulted the FAA for failing to note the faults in Boeing's initial assumptions in those safety procedures.
Trying and failing to do the exact same thing again and again during the middle of an incident is starting to sound very familiar. But there's a difference here between how we handled those incidents in cybersecurity and how they began to handle it at NTSB and FAA. So we've been handling cyber incidents, well, by generating a whole lot of reports, basically. One of the challenges we have is that we've gone from having governmental reports to having private industry, having think tanks generate this kind of information as well. Sentinel-1, it's a laundry list of the folks that are here at this conference, right? These are people providing good information to the industry, but there's a lack of coordination and overall agreement all the time about what caused and creates these kinds of incidents. So then we start getting additional committees involved with it. House Select, or Senate Select Intelligence Committee, House Oversight and Reform, Science, Space, and Technology. I'm not sure how we fix this, except by coming together and recognizing that there's a way to conduct an investigation. And we don't mean incident response. This isn't the moment where we're yanking cables out of the wall and everybody's trying to get a network backup, right? This is about after everyone's taken a breath, gotten 3-4 hours of sleep, and had a chance to ask the question, what happened and how do we prevent this again in future? This is about investigating what happened and generating an understanding of why and how this kind of work needs to happen. So what Victoria and Adam and I did over the course of the last 6 months is create a playbook that lets city and state and national governments conduct an incident investigations, create an incident investigations board, and then conduct their own investigations. Now, you might be asking the question, don't we already have one of those? Don't we have a CSRB? And the answer is that at the same time that this report was getting generated, the CSRB at DHS was being created. The kinds of recommendations we made, it looks an awful lot like the CSRB was designed to serve a different function at DHS. So we've retooled a little bit here to say, instead, there's a way for city, state, county, tribal governments to run incident investigations that will start to create a mass of information in the industry. And how we need to start creating these kinds of boards is 3 phases of investigation, just like the NTSB does. And who is this for? I want you to envision that a deputy city manager gets called into a mayor's office and told, we just had a ransomware incident at the hospital. We've got the patients back. We've got the network back up again, but you have a month to tell me what happened. Go conduct an investigation. Give me some kind of understanding about how we prevent this again in future. That person in government is very unlikely to have ever had experience standing up a major cyber investigation. This is the playbook that shows them how to do it. So Victoria is going to tell you a little bit more about what this looks like, if only because she is the person who has read every NTSB report over the last 20 years and would like to tell you how to take some of those lessons learned and get them implemented into this playbook. So 3 phases of investigation.
The playbook itself is modeled after the NTSB's Aviation Investigations Manual, and I read it so you all don't have to. The opening of the investigation is when the incidents happened, and that's when the board convenes. They decide on an investigator in charge who's going to lead the technical team of the investigation and kind of serve as a guidepost throughout the entire investigation. And they set the goals for the investigation and potentially invite other parties, other companies to contribute technical team members and act as parties to the investigation. Then we move into the technical investigation. We separated the technical investigation from the review portion to create 2 separate teams. So the technical investigation is staffed by the technical team, who are professionals who do this every single day, who are some of the kinds of people who would respond to an initial incident and do the whole initial incident response. And they are going to analyze reports that are coming out of the mitigation process and hopefully get their hands on hardware also. Then those team members are now done and the phase moves into the board review. That's when the board members convene and they look at the report generated by the technical team and they make decisions on, okay, what are the facts that we all agree upon on this incident? And what recommendations are we as a board going to come up with and propose to the community so that in the future, events like this can be mitigated or at least the harm reduced by following these kinds of recommendations. So who are these board members? We broke this down into 4 kinds of people that you would want on a board. The first being individuals. These are cybersecurity experts who are well respected in the field, and they have credibility separate from their affiliated organizations.
A good way to think about it is if you're sitting in here, you're subject to being drafted for this in future.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Then we have corporations. That's because industry has immense power in the cybersecurity industry. However, we want to note that corporations who have a vested interest in the outcome of an investigation, for example, a corporation whose software was used in the course of an attack, those kinds of corporations should not serve on the board and should recuse themselves if they're already on the board of a review board.
And we'll note, too, that there's a moment for parties who are interested in the investigation to submit information later. Just if you are the corporation or the industry that is, or the body that has contributed at least some of the technology that's being investigated, there's a question of interest in that situation. It's best to maintain it as a disinterested a board as possible. All right.
Next, we have government agencies. Regulators also play a big role in the cybersecurity community. So they have a seat at the table, and they have important perspective to add, but they shouldn't be the entire board. They're just one piece of it. Mm-hmm. And lastly, academic organizations. These kinds of organizations have credibility and will help the report after the fact become widespread. So they'd be really useful. Who is the technical team? Like I said, these are professionals who have the skill set to do the hardcore analysis of the incident. They come up with a findings report that is then read by the board members who may not have a technical background.
And yet analogies are probably going to be one of the more powerful things they wield in the process of creating that report, as I think we all know at this point. So what we want to note here too is that as we were writing this, we realized something pretty fundamental. I think the analogy I gave you earlier of the deputy city manager being asked to produce a report is pretty, exemplary of the situation most people find themselves in. We, I think, as an industry, as a community, know at this point that people aren't going to do shit about cybersecurity until they have to. There's going to be a precipitating incident that causes a local or state government to set up a major cyber incident investigations board, right? At least the first one, someone is going to have something dropped in their lap and they're not going to know what to do about it. So the reason we have crisis mode in this playbook, and you'll see it in the Harvard Belfer report, will be set out and it'll be in highlighted text, and in the markdown, you'll see a little bit later on, it's highlighted as well, which you can all get a chance to eyeball, edit, and critique. My markdown could use some improvement. So crisis mode is small insets that tells you, if you are someone who's never done this before, what the absolute key takeaways are. For instance, when we talk about who's going to get put on a board and what the qualities and the traits of a person who would get put on an investigations board are, I give a quick shortcut in crisis mode. And the quick shortcut is, if you don't know who to put on a board, make sure there are 4 people. You're probably the government person already, right? For an individual, go look at your local ISACA chapters, ISC chapters, or B-sides, because you're probably going to have one within 100 miles of you. For academic organizations, go to your local reasonably reputable college or university and ask the chair of the computer science department to either help or recommend someone inside the university. This gives you that quick shortcut to find someone who can help you, right? For most people who've never done this, it seems a little bit facile to just tell people you need to pick a couple people that aren't in government. But the truth is, many people who do this kind of investigation inside a government, it's never occurred to them to ask anyone outside the body that they're working in. It wouldn't occur to them to go to anyone other than the IT department of the city that they're doing this investigation in. It's incredibly important to make the recommendation to reach to outside expertise, not only to connect with industry and provide that credibility via academia, but also make sure that industry can help with both resources and the kind of expertise that's usually found inside some of the most respected corporations in technology and information security. So that's what crisis mode is, and you'll see quick actions like, do this, here's your 10 actions to take, here's the 10 questions to answer. You need to ask 5 whys, go backwards in time, why, to avoid the single points of failure and the root cause analysis mode of thinking people get into, right? That's what crisis mode is, and that's part of the playbook. So what does this look like in action? All right.
So take, for example, a big box retail store has recently been the victim of a point-of-sale attack. We're not going to name names. You can visualize for yourself what that big box retail store would be.
My husband's here, and I'm just remembering about this home improvement project we have to do at home right now. Okay, continue.
So the district manager is freaking out that there's been an attack. He contacts a bunch of people, the police, finally, someone routes him to the governor. The governor turns to the person next to them and says, okay, who should handle this? Chief nerd, chief information officer, that's your job, figure it out. Chief information officer, crisis mode, they have the playbook and they start turning to the crisis mode sections of the playbook we've drafted. So the step 1 is they start to form a board. They find the cybersecurity professional who will serve as the individual. They find someone from industry who can serve on the board, and they find someone from an academic organization. Next, so the board is together, they go and find the technical team. After going to the IT, all of the people on the board at this time go through their networks, and they find respected technical professionals who can serve on the technical team. And then we start the actual investigation and the review process. The technical team does their analysis and they come up with a findings report. The findings report is then handed over to the board for their review. After a short time, so the board members have had a time to review the findings report, they convene and they come up with recommendations and they vote on the findings to include in their final report.
There's one thing to note right here. It's incredibly important to find people for this technical team who can speak not nerd. The not nerd translation process, that translation matrix, is amazingly important. We almost misspoke a little earlier and used the word analogy a great deal, but somebody on the technical team who can explain to state and local officials why and how something happened beyond everybody's screens went red at the hospital, or someone didn't patch a box, because it's very easy in that moment for someone who doesn't understand a lot of the process to say something. And we'll see this reaction in governments a lot, like, well, just mandate that they patch faster. Buddy, if we could mandate that everybody patched faster, nobody would be here right now. We'd all be drinking, right? So the problem we have is that people don't necessarily understand how to translate in a way that will cause the correct action. We've seen people who don't understand aviation will declare that what needs to happen is immediately the 737 MAX need to have the MCAS system ripped out. Well, the level of process failure and process adaptation that causes, as opposed to truly understanding how a flawed MCAS system worked for a 737 MAX, it's facile. Again, it's simplistic, and we need people who don't think simplistically, but can explain simply to people what's going on and how they can work on this process. If your answer to why it happened is pointing a finger instead of the two magic words that tell you that you're talking to an expert, it depends, then you've got a situation where the technical findings are going to get buried under whatever politics are happening in that moment. This is why this is so important to maintain a disinterested, capable technical team and a board to provide a coherent response to what's happening and what has happened. So the recommendations and findings need to be written in plain, clear English, or whatever language is local at that point, to make sure people understand what happened, why, and most importantly, how they can prevent it. And that all needs to go into
the final report. Mm-hmm. And this final report should be readable for the public because we want it to be as public and widely accessible as possible. We recommend hosting it, or the dream scenario is that it's hosted on a public library website, like the Boston Public Library would host it, mm-hmm. so that everyone can access it. It's not hidden on some company's website, and desperately hope no link rot happens, and it's a stable document.
We love libraries for this for a lot of different reasons. First of all, libraries serve a whole lot more functions than simply checking out books, as I think those of us who have seen the services being provided at libraries in our communities over the last couple of years can recall at this point. But also, there's a neutrality to libraries that is really important in this moment. The kind of final report we're looking for has to focus in on the idea that there are multiple reasons why there are process failures and multiple places that you can fix that process failure for the future. Imagine, for instance, that instead of having us all recognize that SolarWinds had a failure, and again, after more than a year and a half, we don't have a coherent governmental report about what happened, where, why, and how. Imagine that every report, every kind of cause and analysis of a cybersecurity incident all boiled down to an intern set the production server's password to SolarWinds 123, right? The thing we're trying to avoid is that is a single answer. And the thing we're trying to cause is for people to ask 5 whys behind that. The first why is, who let the intern have access to the production server? The second question is, what rules and compensating controls weren't in place that had that outcome, right? The why before that is, what were the budgetary processes, the compliance processes, and the lack of expertise or training that let those compensating controls or technical processes get put into place without someone catching it? Is there a lack of diverse thought among the people who are looking at these processes? Because if we boil every single incident down to, well, the intern did it, or the contractor didn't patch the struts box, or any other form of single point of failure, of root cause analysis, we lose all the richness of what actually happened. I think everyone here knows that every one of these incidents is complex, is interesting, is fascinating. For those of us who love looking into this stuff and understanding it, I love this field. And as a student pilot, I get to see every single year with updated regulations in the FAR AIMS. This is the Federal Aviation Regulations and Airmen's Instruction Manuals. I get to see why and how regulations every single year get ticked up a little bit better And then I become personally responsible for knowing those every single year. We've been talking about how this kind of work it seems grinding, but there's such a joy in it when you see people finally understanding what's happened. And I recall that 6 months after WannaCry happened, the NCSC in the UK put out a really great report on WannaCry, what happened, how it happened, budgetary and process failures, geographic locations, the names of the technologies that were used, what was and wasn't updated, the lack of skills and the lack of upskilling that caused it in specific locations. It's a beautiful document. If you ever get a chance to read it, it is absolutely the kind of thing that we want to see come out of this process. That's the kind of final report we want to see happen. So
what does this mean for organizations responding to cyber incidents in the future? What we hope happens is that organizations, state and local governments take this playbook and set up their own MCIIB across the country. So it'd be multiple boards investigating incidents that happen near them or of importance to them, and we develop this shared lessons learned narrative, not just on like the big cybersecurity events, but on the small ones. And then we take those and we draw the lessons and we build on them, and they spread throughout the community, and we mitigate the damage done from these events, and we prevent them from happening in the future, hopefully.
We've seen it's not just important to have those incident investigation boards set up early, although with crisis mode, we understand at least the first one almost everywhere is going to be in crisis mode. It's going to be a precipitating incident instead of a thoughtfully planned out process. But what we also really hope is going to happen is we hope that when we go back and research what caused what in a historic incident, in some of the more famous breaches that have occurred over time, like for instance the OMB breach, right? The thing we're hoping is that when you go back and look for what happened and how you can prevent that particular kind of incident in future, that there is a shared understanding of what happened. Right now, it would be very difficult to get everybody in this room to agree on some of the most basic facts of the most famous cyber attacks that exist in the world. And that's the challenge that I think we're looking to address. I've bumped up against this personally when trying to find out what happened, when, and where in some of the most major incidents in the world. NotPetya, WannaCry, Stuxnet. I've bumped into people who think it's okay to just have an opinion about what happened instead of going back and looking at it. And then you go back and find that there's no information left anymore, that the information that was hosted is gone, that it got pulled behind a paywall. A pretty famous one was the Broadcom takeover of Symantec's white papers. It happened really quickly, and it was put back up again. But everyone was relying on a lot of those white papers from the awesome people at Symantec who'd done a lot of that white paper, a lot of that serious research, and it was just thought of as marketing materials. The problem we're looking at is right now, so much of our shared history in this industry is marketing materials that can go away at any time. That's why libraries are awesome, and that's why we want to see this kind of information available around the world, and certainly at least in the United States. All right, so what we would love to do now is we would love to present not only the Belfer Center's write-up of this. It's very pretty. I am not a visual person, but I hear that the visual layout on this is really great. Go for it. Take a look on not only our sites, you can also see it in a couple of the tweets we've shared today, and it's right there on Harvard's website. But we would also love to share that for the next 2 years, I, Victoria, and Adam Shostak will be benevolently dictating over a GitHub project that exists out there for anyone to use. This right here is the markdown version of that playbook. Please submit pull requests. Victoria will wield an iron hammer. We're considering having one forged. It's going to be great. And we'll find out what we can learn from the community about what does and doesn't work in setting up a board and a playbook like this. Do you have any thoughts on that too?
Please do it. That's my thought. I spent so long writing this. I hope it lives on.
It's pretty awesome. So yeah, none of this is ever going to be perfect, right? Like we're never going to be able to make this all the way perfect. There's always going to be something going on, right? The problem we see now is that there are still organizations. As of last year, 26% of the organizations that were vulnerable to WannaCry in 2017 still are. And I am exhausted by that. And I think a lot of people in this room probably are as well. So we're never going to make this all the way perfect. And I think for those of us who are currently in organizations, anecdotally, in the Fortune 500 companies or publicly listed companies I've been part of, without naming names, I would say anecdotally, on average, there are 4 separate, reasonably important, like medium level or above, incident investigations occurring, like ongoing incident response that happens all the time. So you're not alone. A lot of this stuff is perpetually happening. And yet, once we clean up the mess, it's like we throw the trash out and forget that it ever happened. We keep making the same messes again and again. And I want people to be able to learn from that. This isn't going to get any better, too. We're now seeing even more sophisticated attacks. Forgive me, because I'm going to say AI-enabled credential stuffing, which has a technical meaning. I swear I'm not using it in a way that's going to be marketing. But when I talk about this right here, I use it in its technical term. We're using the statistical analysis of publicly available data to more effectively target phishing attacks. It's automated spear phishing at scale, and that's really frightening to me. This is the kind of stuff we have to learn lessons about in advance. Otherwise, I mean, we're going to end up with the same kinds of situations we found ourselves in before. If you do what you did, you get what you got, right? So, anybody can be ready for a major cyber incident investigation. Everybody should be ready for it, and your community is going to need this sooner or later. I think in the last 2 hours, I've gotten 3 different emails just out of the middle of nowhere of people who need help with incident response, a ransomware investigation. Like, your LinkedIn inboxes are all filling up with the same thing too, right? There needs to be more people who know how to go and serve themselves from this body of knowledge that we can create. And if it exists in public on library websites, we don't have to worry about it disappearing behind paywalls. This is why we care this much about it, because it's not going to get less complicated. But at least we can start to predict what the future is going to look like. So thank you so very much. It's been incredibly wonderful to be here before you. Got something to say?
Thank you so much. I'm so happy I got to kick off my public speaking, black hat, cybersecurity all in one. I'm so excited to be here and so excited to see all of your requests, pull requests on that GitHub document.
Can we get one last applause for Victoria? First talk ever.